It happened in the year of the revolution. The US Embassy takeover was humiliation enough, and America deployed ships to the Persian Gulf. Shortly after, Imam Khomeini, leader of the revolution, called for the formation of the Basij, an auxiliary force, on November the 26th, 1979. And the anniversary of the formation of the Basij each year marks Basij Week. The Basij is a people's force, meaning a force for the people, made up of a good portion of the population, to be mobilized in wartime and engage in developmental activities in peacetime. Now, how much that entity has actually done and what keeps it true to its cause we'll be attempting in this episode. So stay with me, Leila Faramarzi, on Iran Today. As a subsidiary of the IRGC, or Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, the Basij is often forgotten to be a force from the people, although the IRGC, or Sepah, also basically came from the same stock, that's deprived walks of life. The Basij has 6 major groupings. I got to talk to 2, one of them being the Student Basij. Mr. Mofrad is head of the Students' Basij, although members consider it egalitarian more than rigidly hierarchical. He gave us an interview in his office in what was the Americans' only section of what was once the US Embassy in Tehran, now known as the Den of Espionage.
هویت بسیج که همون بسیج کردن و آماده کردن.
The identity of the Basij, which is to mobilize, prepare and equip the people to expand their participation in their country's development, has been preserved all these years. That is, if the organization loses the identity or mission, it will lose its basic function. However, the issues people have been involved in over the past 4 years have depended on what was needed at the time. For example, there has been a need for military participation in the country at some point, and so the general manifestation of Basij was on the battlefields. At another point, when the country needed reconstruction and similar services, the people further contributed to the development of deprived villages and areas.
The students, who are unpaid volunteers priding themselves for generating their own ideas to mobilize authorities, didn't appear to feel like anyone's subsidiary. They said it didn't matter who was in power giving orders, long as it was to serve the country and ultimately steer it towards the fulfillment of Islamic rulership and the salvation of all.
We set up a large vaccination center here at the former US Embassy. The representatives from the Health Ministry have praised the center as one of the cleanest, most stylish and effective vaccination centers in the country that provides services around the clock. And a significant number of people came into the perimeter of the former US Embassy and received services here. We believe perhaps the greatest death to America is serving the people.
Over a year since the formation of the force on April the 30th, 1980, a bill was approved to form the National Basij Organization. By way of the bill, the Basij is tasked with preventing and countering any foreign military aggression and natural disasters, concrete threats. It's also tasked with countering political, economic and cultural threats. After the 8-year Iraq-Iran war of the 1980s, the force grew bigger and its activities expanded. Probably the number of Basijis who serve at military organizations are just a fraction of those Basijis doing non-military jobs in universities, workshops, villages, cities, and Islamic seminaries, as well as among nomads and people from various social backgrounds. But first, how the force participated in wartime operations. Mr. Hashemzadeh is the Students' Basij Demands Deputy, meaning he's responsible for voicing expectations of and to the government where it seems to be going astray.
Basij دغدغش هست به عنوان.
As an ideology and culture, Basij's concern is to preserve the cultural, economic, social and territorial integrity of the country. There are issues over which opinions are divided, including ethnic and religious matters. Normally, people with diverse religious, dialectical, cultural and ethnic backgrounds are living in peace and have no problems with each other. but there can be some instances that differences arise between them and divisions are created, the source of which is known to us all. Basij enters the scene to overcome the division using the capacities of the same communities.
We visited Basij headquarters downtown Tehran to hear the construction or development Basij chief, Sardar or General Zahrai, reminisce.
We continue to adopt the model we used during the 80-year-long imposed war with Iraq. A volunteer would go to the front lines and was assigned to a division either in support, the militia or the engineering battalion. When you volunteer for a job, you'll be a part of an orderly system. Basij will create that order. Basij showcases its work in the form of providing services. But it has another facet to it, people's combat readiness.
I said the role of the Basij expanded after the war. Well, today it has set course to help in eliminating poverty and materializing the goal of a resistance economy. So I asked of the criteria deciding the poverty line and eligibility for donations in cash or kind.
There's a movement ordered by the leader of the Islamic Revolution called Contribution of the Faithful, which started after the coronavirus pandemic hit. Identifying families in need who have been affected by the pandemic, for example those who've lost their jobs, is the main objective. 1.6 million households were identified. We tried to provide them with relief packages. We also took steps to release prisoners convicted of unintentional crimes. We distributed bags, shoes and tablets, and even helped pay for dowries.
It was on May the 7th, 2000 that the leader issued a directive to establish the development Basij, to encourage the youth to participate in developing agriculture and natural resources in villages and deprived areas. It would result in labor productivity and strengthening job opportunities, among other things. The blow to some natural resources, however, is not going to be easy to compensate, nor can it have helped agriculture. But earnest Basiji youth put in all their effort, all the same. Oh, but natural disaster, that cause of sudden death and destruction, loss and poverty, is a thing this country is nothing short of. A mini-continent of every kind of beauty, Iran has seen enough floods and earthquakes over the past few decades to make up for every blessing it enjoys. And it's at such times that a million-strong force, over 10 million-strong force that mobilizes the locals as well, comes as a welcome relief. On November the 12th, 2017, an earthquake measuring 7.3 on the Richter scale hit Sarpol Zahab in the western province of Kermanshah, shaking it down to its foundation. Some 90,000 houses were partially or completely damaged by the quake, which took over 660 lives and left more than 10,000 injured. In the early days, when people needed shelters, young jihadi groups collected public donations and distributed essential items to the people, and set up shelters in the area to speed up their work and reduce the cost of building shelters. I did ask, however, whether authorities followed up on the effort to have built up or helped build up houses by now for the afflicted.
One example is that we built 2,200 units in Sarpol Zahab in cooperation with the government and the Housing Foundation. We did not manage the projects, we were merely helping by bringing in volunteers. We built 230 units in Sisakht. We're currently working on 250 units in Andika and Bozoft. We're also making 600 temporary housing units there. We're doing joint work in Hormozgan. Specialized Basij members provide additional service works including counseling, generating estimates related to agriculture and the resistive economy, mobilizing Basij's women community as well as artists and athletes to cheer people up, or mobilizing the medical community and dispatching medical teams to different areas.
Not long after Kermanshah, the whole country was swept over. Heavy rainfall in 2019 led to flooding in 28 out of Iran's 31 provinces. It affected over 42 million inhabitants in 253 cities and caused widespread damage to municipal facilities, including health centers and hospitals. In the first hours, under 2,500 jihadi groups went to Khuzestan. About 1,500 groups went to the northern provinces and 2,000 forces were sent to Lorestan province. That's west to south.
اگر بخوام هرمزگان رو عرض بکنم خدمتتون چون من اخیراً خودم از
I've recently visited Hormozgan province and I have seen that Basij has estimated the needed facilities and mobilized all the people and state's facilities to solve the problems. For example, in the city of Fen in Hormozgan, we needed to know how many villages are in the area and how much damage they have sustained. We generated very accurate data, which can be used both by the people or the government.
Imam Khomeini would have had the total number of Basij forces doubled. He said, "Teach the youth that any land must take but a few years to turn into a country with 20 million youngsters ready to take up arms. It must have a 20 million strong army. Such a country would be invulnerable." The country's seen no end to incident, which is why I wondered if the flooding was a lesson to go for prevention rather than cure. Because a major factor in rain turning to flood was that the dams were not cleaned. Are authorities studying the country for possible calamity in future, and are they taking action to prevent that calamity?
ما تو این قسمتش بی‌طرف که خورده ضعیف.
Frankly, we've been a little weak when it comes to prevention. As the crisis unfolds, people's empathy usually helps cover the gaps. People do wonders. Whenever a disaster strikes, people will help regardless of the financial difficulties. The contributions mask our weak responses. This is considered part of the work too. Revolutionary institutions and people bear part of the burden.
A more recent incident occurred in the southern province of Hormozgan, meaning 2 earthquakes of a magnitude of over 6 on the Richter scale, 14th November.
خب زلزله هرمزگان ما مدل رفتاریمون قرار
In the
دادیم.
case of the earthquake in Hormozgan, we responded by creating bases. Immediately after an incident occurs, we'll set up the bases considering the area that's been affected. For instance, we put up a national base in Sarapol Zahab because the damage was severe and we needed help from all provinces. But we responded to the crisis in Sisakht by creating a local base. In the floods of 2019, regional bases were involved.
A creepier calamity has been the one that swept the world since 2019. That would be, yes, COVID-19. As with polio, the Basij took on a vaccination feat. The vaccination process did not meet standards in all centers, which is why I asked how the Basij or Basij mobilized individuals would have been meeting required criteria, such as checking vaccine subjects for fever.
خب بسیج وظیفه خودش دید که باید در حل این مشکل
Basij assumed the duty of helping solve this problem. It made different moves, including attending hospitals, performing burial rites, things that people were afraid to do in the beginning. We saw the medical potential of our specialized members, so we sent them to help in the health and medical sector. They helped with vaccinations. A very large vaccination center was established in this complex we are at, the former US Embassy.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. More to be said on the matter, but first a quick media review to see what other outlets have to say. And which outlets will we be peeking at today? IRNA, the national news agency, quotes Iran's military chief, as do other outlets. That would be Major General Bagheri, calling for acquiring greater offensive capabilities by drawing on scientific capabilities of Basiji and non-Basiji scientists. Iran has felt threatened for the past 40 years and more, and that feeling materialized physically, say since 2007, when generally Israeli attacks assassinated nuclear scientists and nuclear facilities. Now, what did Bagheri say exactly? Boosting ability to target threat centers, a strategic policy, runs the headline. He outlined science and technology are one of the main drivers and engine of progress. Workers of the field of the industry have considered the increase of deterrence in the field of defense and military as the forefront of their strategies, as the guarantor of strengthening Islamic Iran. Mehr News reads, tactical exercise of Basij's Fatahin special unit kicks off. Now, what is deterrent military might if no one knows of it to keep off? Tactical exercises can be the answer. They can in themselves be deterrent, just as they are practice for the forces to keep agile and their morale boosted. The Fatahin or conquerors will be holding the 3-day exercise with 1,000 special personnel present, and part of the exercise will be ambush and counter-ambush techniques and shooting with specialized weapons, in practicing operations against terrorist groups and Takfiri groups. Tehran Times quotes the leader, enemies after destroying, nullifying Basij. Well, if there are enemies, numerous enemies after Iran, surely they'll be most wary of their enemy at the front. That's the forces, namely the ready-to-jump-on-a-mine forces, the Basij, what Ayatollah Khamenei called a God-given reserve and manifestation of national power. In defending the country and its independence and stability, in providing vital services on a national scale, in leading scientific activities and new technologies, in valued approaches and creating a spiritual atmosphere, it is the name of Basij that comes up and the presence of Basij that draws attention, the leader wrote. And he called on Basiji forces to further concentrate on thwarting the enemy's plots, naturally. That'll be it for the news segment. Do stay tuned. War, be it waged by another country or another life form, unites. So with an outbreak such as the corona pandemic, a less friendly Basiji presence in cities in the earlier years of the revolution has partly been forgotten to the forces' services with the pandemic and likes. In fact, 50% of the corona vaccination process nationwide since it got underway has been up to the Basij. That organization joined forces with the Health Ministry by agreement. The agreement enforced longer working hours for both entities to double vaccine administering, as reported on September the 13th.
ابتدای شکل‌گیری کرونا و ورود مردم برای
When the pandemic started, there weren't enough goods available, such as masks and other personal protective equipment, to cover people's demands. So Basij started producing them. Then they helped the medical staff in hospitals, and recently they contributed to the vaccination program, and we are witnessing the extent of their contribution. When the government, meaning the governmental institutions and executive bodies, are unable to work on their own, people provide assistance to fulfill their needs. That's what Basij is all about.
While we are on the topic of disease and vaccines, in the 1990s, polio was this country's nightmare. More than 9 million children under the age of 5 would have to be vaccinated to eradicate the disease. Would have taken the healthcare system alone time. But within just 24 hours, 8.5 million children across the country were vaccinated against polio with the participation of Basij forces through a door-to-door vaccination campaign. Thing is, they rally the people to help where their own numbers fall short.
Basij اون دانشگاهه.
Basij is like a university that trains people with specific capabilities and skills scientifically and religiously, which enables them to work in different fields and play an effective role based on what's needed at the time. We need to take that into account too. For example, when an earthquake strikes, people are grappling with its consequences. As you know, the capabilities of the people, NGOs and grassroots organizations have always been greater than those of the government.
Since the autumn of 2008, the Basij has had a considerable presence in cyberspace. The first step was the launch of 10,000 blogs from 10,000 Basij bases to provide the internet with virtuous content. The second phase took place in 2009 with the establishment of the Cyber Council of the Basij. How the council went about things was it began training warriors for cyber warfare. By 2017, there were 18,000 people in the task force that monitored and reported on news stories and recent online activity, especially any activities by the opposition. That's according to the deputy of Iran's chief prosecutor, Abdussamad Khorramabadi. Deputy prosecutor of that time, that is.
یه طیف گسترده‌ای وجود داره.
There's a wide range in that regard. The Basij organization assigns the roles and dispatches the volunteers. For example, when we set up a vaccination center, put medical students at the front line where people need to be treated. In terms of other services, however, including those related to organizing the patients and so on, we use graduates of other fields of study that may not require special expertise in those areas. We have special capacities. The student Basij centers have created good research facilities in universities across the country.
Back to our focus. The Basij has several branches. There are 3 main armed wings. That's the Ashura and Al-Zahra brigades that are the security and military branch tasked with defending the neighborhoods in case of emergencies, the Imam Hussein brigades, and the Imam Ali brigades. The force also has multiple branches with specialized functions, meaning civilian functions. They include the development or Sazandegi Basij, Basij of the guilds, Basij of the nomads, and the student Basij. Members can be men or women, young or old, and they are grouped as 3 types. Regular forces, those are the unpaid volunteers who receive perks such as university spots, active members, and special members. With 54,000 bases across the country, Basij is probably the biggest cultural, social, and military popular network in the world.
در تعریف بسیج بعضی وقتا
One mistake people often make in defining Basij is coupling it with the Basij organization. It's an organization that's helping out and assuming the role of a national player. But Basij is made of patriotic people who are ready to do something for their country. Their thoughts and views may be different, but they are concerned for the country and are hopeful for its future, so they want to do something about it. That describes Basij. As late Imam Khomeini and the leader of the Islamic Revolution have put it, they can look like me or have another appearance, but they are compassionate either way.
It's a group of people happy to show up and put all their talents to use wherever there's room to serve a holy cause. Sacrifice is at the core. The given definition of a Basiji concludes, faith originates from the heart of Basijis and makes them work hard. Similarly, insight tells them how to proceed, how to identify the criteria, and how to tread the path. The Basij's budget is modest. Our Basij chief explained how the force had remained true to its cause, however.
چند تا مجموعه و نهادن که کمک جمع.
There are several groups and institutions that collect donations. One is the Red Crescent and the other is the Imam Khomeini Relief Committee, which collects aid for the deprived. Basij has also collected donations in some instances, but not all, including in the aftermath of the 2019 floods. But we have collected goods for Hormozgan. When we're collecting financial aid, we deposit the sums in a joint account that all cities have so that the government, the Friday prayer leader, the representatives of the leader of the Islamic Revolution in different cities, and the IRGC know about it. As you know, Basij has the largest capillary network in the country. There are 54,000 Basij centers across the country.
What the Basij, or originally underprivileged mobilized resistance forces, identifies with in essence is the word resistance, which has also inspired the resistance front of more recent times in standing up to the hostility of domineering powers. Interestingly, when Chief of the Pakistani Army Lieutenant General Qamar Javed Bajwa visited Tehran in 2017, he said that Pakistan is interested in learning from Iran's experience of creating the Basij organization and using popular forces to counter enemy threats.
مشابهش الان در کشورهای مثلا
Neighboring countries, including Iraq and Syria, have been able to make similar moves. They have been able to surmount problems where they created popular groups alongside their armies. When Imam Khomeini ordered the formation of a student Basij in 1979, they recommended that the resistance nuclei be formed across the Islamic world. We have seen them in action in recent years. When it comes to defending the holy shrines in Syria, for example, the people of Syria and other countries helped solve the crisis. If it wasn't for the people, the armies wouldn't be able to pull that off.
And that's all there's room for here and now, but surely there'll be plenty more to present when or if the next natural disaster occurs to call for aid. Hopefully not by next week. But do join us then at the same times, and remember you can take a peek on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter via @Iran Today Show. Bye for now.